So for today's video, I wanted to take the time and let Resident Evil 4 fans know how lucky we've been so far in the 2020s. We had leaks of Capcom going crazy and actually going to the legendary Resident Evil 4 remake all throughout 2020 right after Resident Evil 3 remake released. Then last month we had an Unreal Engine VR remake of Resident Evil 4 release on the Oculus Quest 2. We got a PlayStation commercial with the illuminados symbol in September. Then back in July we had a Netflix Resident Evil series called Infinite Darkness, which took place 2 years after Resident Evil 4, and featured Leon and the Easter egg of Ashley. Then before that we had Resident Evil 8, which had a lot of similarities to Resident Evil 4 to the point where some people say it feels like a first-person Resident Evil 4. It feels like Capcom is where Capcom should have been after releasing Resident Evil 4 back in 2005. And what I mean by that is with Resident Evil 4 turning 17 next January, the Resident Evil 4 nostalgia kick is coming in hard, like how the Resident Evil 1-Resident Evil 3 classic nostalgia hit in the 2010s. And that bought us Resident Evil Revelations, which kicked the possibility of going back to horror-focused Resident Evil games in third person. Then Revelations 2 was 3 years later. And finally Resident Evil 7 came and brought back the horror roots of the franchise and lead into Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 getting remakes. Now the same thing is seemingly happening with Resident Evil 8, leading us to a Resident Evil 4 remake. While I have no proof something bad clearly happened between Shinji Mikami and Capcom back in 2006, not too long after Resident Evil 4 released. Once Shinji left, it seemed Capcom was actually a bit mad that Resident Evil 4 scored such high praise, but its sales weren't as high as some of the big games that followed soon after, like Gears of War. Resident Evil 5 didn't score as high with critics, but sold much better, and it seemed Capcom did not want to be a part of anything Resident Evil 4 related anymore going forward. None of the Resident Evil spin-offs focused on Resident Evil 4. Like the other games, like how Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles mostly focused on Resident Evil 1, and how the only part of Dark Side Chronicles that had a Resident Evil 4 reference was it having Krauser in it. Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D featured Resident Evil 4 locations and enemies, but Leon was completely absent. Resident Evil 6 released in 2012 and seemed to change Leon to the point that he was barely recognizable from Resident Evil 4. They also decided to make a spin-off multiplayer game that same year about Raccoon City instead of Resident Evil 4, even though Resident Evil 6 at the time had a part in Europe. And it just seemed like throughout the whole 2010s Resident Evil 4 was ignored, besides the occasional HD re-release with no extra content. Now we are living in a time where they practically remade Resident Evil 4 in VR in Unreal Engine 4. And they're referencing Resident Evil 4 stuff left and right. We keep getting more and more leaks about Resident Evil 4 remake. We got a PlayStation commercial with the illuminados symbol in September. And it seems like Capcom realizes they have something huge. And I just want to say is just how happy I am for this moment. After getting Resident Evil 6 Day 1 back on October 1st, 2012, I thought that game might have killed Resident Evil. And it was never coming back, and the days of amazing Resident Evil games were gone. Also, let me point out I only hate Resident Evil 6 on PlayStation 3. Once I got the Platinum Trophy on October 30th, 2012, I barely touch that version anymore. The remastered version with easier QTEs and 60 frames per second is much better. Not only did a lot of people not like what Resident Evil 6 was doing by trying to appeal to every Resident Evil fan from 1 to 5, but a lot of people started blaming Resident Evil 4 for what happened with Resident Evil 5 and 6. There was a huge divide between classic Resident Evil fans and Resident Evil action fans, and 4 got the blame for anything bad that followed. While I loved Revelations 1 and 2, it was Resident Evil 7 that really brought the franchise back like I could never imagine, and I'm so happy to have gotten through the days of Resident Evil 4 bashing, and how it ruined not only the Resident Evil franchise but horror as a whole. I hope Resident Evil 4 Remake takes this series to heights it's never seen before, like how the original Resident Evil 4 did back in 2005, but whatever happens with the potential remake, I just want to say it is so nice to see so many people nowadays not blame Resident Evil 4 for everything that followed it as much anymore. And that is all. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope everybody out there has an amazing day. Special thanks to naturalreaders.com.